The sun was setting over the small church on Elm Street as Thomas, a deaf war veteran, made his way toward the entrance. The quiet town seemed peaceful enough, but peace had always felt elusive to him. He had come to the church for a reason he couldn't quite put into words. Something to fill the emptiness left behind by years of battle and isolation. As he reached the steps, he saw the two officers standing near a patrol car, their attention fixed on the scene in front of them. Thomas hesitated for a moment, sensing something was off, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He didn't belong here, he knew that. People like him, people with scars that weren't visible, were often ignored, avoided, or misunderstood. The officers didn't acknowledge his presence immediately. Thomas stood still, trying to figure out what to do. His heart beat a little faster. He had learned long ago to keep to himself, to avoid drawing attention. But today, something felt different. The air was thick with tension, and the officer's gaze shifted to him. Thomas could see the look in their eyes, a mix of suspicion and disregard. They didn't see a man. They saw someone less, someone who didn't belong. "Can I help you?" one of the officers asked, his voice cold and uninterested. Thomas froze. He tried to sign to let the officer know he couldn't hear him, but his body felt stiff, his movements hesitant. His mind raced. What did the officer want from him? Why did it feel like every move he made was scrutinized, every breath he took, watched? The officer's face remained impassive, his eyes hard. There was no empathy in that look, no understanding. "Step away from the door," the officer ordered, his voice louder now. Thomas didn't know what to do. He stepped back slightly, unsure of what was happening. But the officer didn't wait. Without warning, he stepped forward, pulling out a taser. Thomas's heart skipped a beat. Panic surged through him, and before he could react, the officer fired. The electricity coursed through his body with unbearable force. His muscles locked, and he collapsed to the ground, helpless and powerless. Everything felt like it was spinning out of control. Thomas could barely breathe. His body trembled as the taser's electric current overwhelmed his senses. His head buzzed, but there was no sound, just a deafening silence. He couldn't speak, couldn't fight back. All he could do was lie there, vulnerable, unable to defend himself. The officer stood over him, his face blank, unaware of the terror he had just caused. The world around Thomas began to fade, and the pain seemed to multiply with each passing second. But just as the officer moved to advance again, the church door suddenly swung open. A team of soldiers, dressed in full tactical gear, stepped out into the night. The officers didn't know how to react. The soldiers moved quickly, their presence commanding, their eyes focused. The tension in the air grew thick, and the officer hesitated. One of the soldiers stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Is he all right?" he asked, kneeling beside Thomas. The officer stammered, but no words came out. The soldier didn't wait for a response. "You've overstepped," he said quietly, turning toward the officer. "He didn't need to be tased. He didn't resist. You'll need to explain your actions." Thomas remained on the ground, still struggling to regain control of his body, but he couldn't help but feel a shift in the air. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something different, something like safety. The soldiers didn't look at him as a victim. They looked at him as someone who deserved to be treated with dignity, someone worth protecting. For the first time in a long while, Thomas didn't feel invisible. The officer was led away by two soldiers. They didn't say a word to him, but they didn't need to. It was clear that there would be consequences for his actions. The soldiers' focus shifted back to Thomas. They hadn't just protected him physically, they had restored a sense of justice. As Thomas slowly sat up, one of the soldiers placed a hand on his shoulder, offering silent comfort. For the first time in what felt like forever, Thomas felt like he mattered. Not just as a man, but as a human being who deserved to be treated with respect. The soldiers gathered around Thomas, ensuring he was all right before helping him to his feet. His legs felt unsteady, but the soldier's support was unwavering. One of them knelt beside him, asking gently, "Are you okay?" Thomas, still recovering from the shock, nodded slowly. He couldn't speak yet, his voice lost in the silence that surrounded him. But in the soldier's eyes, he saw something unexpected: compassion. "I'm fine," Thomas finally managed to say, his voice hoarse. "Thank you." It felt strange to say those words, but they were all he had. The soldier helped him steady himself, making sure he didn't fall. The officer, now escorted away, was a shadow in the background. His authority had crumbled under the weight of his own mistakes. The soldiers, on the other hand, stood tall, their presence a quiet promise. They weren't just soldiers protecting their country. They were people who understood the importance of protecting what mattered most: human dignity. As Thomas stood, still shaken, one of the soldiers turned to the others. "We're not just here for the fight. We're here for the people," he said. His words hung in the air, but they weren't just for the officers. They were for Thomas, too. For the first time, Thomas understood what it meant to be seen not as a burden, but as someone worth standing up for. The soldiers didn't leave him alone. They stood guard, watching over him as he tried to regain his bearings. One soldier offered him a bottle of water. Another asked if he needed anything. Thomas couldn't believe what was happening. He had expected judgment. He had expected to be cast aside, as he had been so many times before. But instead, these soldiers had treated him with respect, with care. They had seen him for who he truly was: a man who had been wronged, but not forgotten. "Are you all right?" the same soldier who had spoken earlier asked again. This time, Thomas could hear the genuine concern in his voice. He wasn't just asking out of politeness. He was asking because he truly cared. "I'm better," Thomas replied, his voice still unsteady but full of gratitude. "I wasn't expecting this. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," the soldier said with a smile. "Just know that you're safe now. We've got your back." For the first time in a long time, Thomas felt something stir within him. It wasn't hope yet, but it was something close. The soldiers didn't just protect his body, they protected his spirit, his dignity. And for the first time in a long time, Thomas allowed himself to believe that there were still people who cared, people who would fight for what was right. As the soldiers helped him into the church, Thomas walked with a sense of purpose, not just as a man who had been wronged, but as a man who had been given a chance to reclaim his life. And though the road ahead would be difficult, he no longer felt alone. He no longer felt invisible. The soldiers had shown him that there was more to life than survival. There was dignity, and for that, Thomas would be forever grateful.